The story of Sylvester Stallone's life is one of unwavering perseverance and an unrelenting drive for success, despite the fact that it seemed like every door would close before he could enter. In addition to captivating audiences, his journey, from a challenging upbringing to becoming one of the most well-known action heroes in the world, demonstrates how tenacity and self-belief can overcome almost any obstacle. From the streets of New York to the heartbreaks of family tragedy to the moment of success when viewers worldwide fell in love with his alter persona, Rocky Balboa, the story that follows chronicles his amazing journey. Sly clearly went overboard. He's in his 70s now. How did he manage to survive? People sometimes ask questions like that, considering the staggering number of injuries he has had over his life. Even though injuries are common for action actors, Sylvester Stallone seemed to experience setback after setback without ever fully recuperating. After being attacked with acid, he recovered. Despite being shot, he recovered completely. Even when his own mother attempted to harm him as a baby, he managed to survive. He learned a key lesson from those fights. It's more important to be able to take a beating and keep going than it is to hit hard. Years later, though, even this apparently unbreakable guy would take a blow so horrible and unthinkable that he would be unable to just get back up and pretend it never happened. He could do nothing to prevent that disaster. The disaster he would experience would test his capacity for endurance, grief, love, and acceptance. Before diving into that deep personal anguish, it's crucial to understand how Sylvester Stallone's early life shaped the guy we came to admire. He spoke often of his mother's callous remarks. "The only reason you're here is because the hanger didn't work," she'd respond. She once recalled that if there had been a real problem with his brain, she would have frozen him on a ledge. These shocking stories reveal the kind of environment he grew up in. It's easy to assume that everyone's household is the same when you're young and don't have many friends or acquaintances to compare yours to. For Stallone, the concept of a happy home was alien. When he was 11 years old, he ran away to Philadelphia to find his mother, who had abandoned him. The court system inevitably stepped in and returned him to his abusive father. By then, much of the psychological damage had already been done. Stallone's turbulent childhood made him something of a renegade canon, drawn to chaos and suffering because it felt natural to him. In a culture that seemed to be designed to crush any hope he dared to harbor, acting turned out to be his salvation and lifeline. Later, Stallone said, "I just wanted to feel heroic. I was totally absorbed in fantasy and non-reality. I would spend hours watching the same movie 5 or 6 times in a row in theaters. I imagined myself leading that life, overcoming evil, working hard, and fighting against overwhelming obstacles. I was always a hero worshiper. I wanted to be the one who saves lives and improves the world, without any actual money, no plan, and no safe place to stay." Sylvester fled the house as fast as he could. He remembered, "My life was on the wane. I had absolutely nothing. Robberies, vehicle collisions, physical attacks, and even acid being thrown at him were all part of the daily battle for existence on the streets. My coat was my home, and I slept in alcoves and bus terminals." He was worn out spiritually, emotionally, and physically. He believed he had what it required to be a big-screen action star, but the outside world saw him as a forlorn dreamer who still aspired to make it one day. At every agency he visited with his portfolio and headshots, he was told, "We're not accepting new talent," or "Your speech is strange." One agent even inquired as to whether he had a speech issue. Stallone, confronted with the fact that he was born in a New York charity ward, said, "Your eyes droop." His mother, who was 9 months pregnant, wandered aimlessly on buses out of fear of giving birth, and she had to be rushed off a bus in the final moments to go to a local charity unit where Sylvester was born. Partially paralyzed, nerves on one side of his lips from a badly delivered speech were the origin of his characteristic frown and somewhat slurred speech. He was told that his physical attributes prevented him from landing high-profile Hollywood assignments. He was either typecast as a gangster or limited to working as a prop man in theaters. Disillusioned, he considered quitting acting altogether. He had an innate yearning to be the main character in his own story, even though he had been turned down for several auditions. "I'll take all my anger and pour them into the page," he said. "Perhaps I should just write scripts instead," thought I. In an effort to put himself at a distance from practically everyone, Stallone wrote screenplay after screenplay, expressing his frustrations and ambitions. He had a strong belief that he would finally produce something amazing that would solely benefit him in the lead. He packed up everything he owned, drove 11 days to Los Angeles, and paid $40 on a used car once he was able to scrape together enough cash to leave New York. Henry Winkler, who was famous at the time for playing the Fonz on Happy Days, was the only person he knew in Los Angeles. His automobile broke down near Hollywood and Vine in a moment so lyrical it felt inevitable. Henry was unable to take Sylvester in because he had his own family to support, but he helped Stallone find a budget motel where he stayed for the first few nights before spotting a run-down apartment in the valley near Balboa Boulevard. Later, Stallone would remark, "That was the fuel I needed. I had to give my next script my all after hitting that rock bottom Stallone's wife was expecting, and he had to sell his cherished dog because he was unable to give it the care it needed because of mounting pressure and rapidly declining finances." Stallone recalled, "I heard the wolf at the door. He had nothing else to do if this script didn't work, so he sat down in desperation to write what would become Rocky in about 3.5 days. My wife was expecting. I had just sold my dog. I had $106 in the bank, and my rent was $300. A down-and-out boxer from Philadelphia's toughest neighborhoods, Rocky Balboa was easily written off by people who only saw his intimidating size and slurred speech. According to Stallone, just by the way he walks, people assume he's a bully or some dark character. In this sense, Rocky was a continuation of Stallone, underappreciated, misunderstood, but full of unrealized potential. All the sadness, humiliations, and suffering became ingrained in his DNA. Stallone refused bids that went over $360,000 despite the temptation, knowing full well that he would never be able to forgive himself if he sold his script without making an appearance. He began haggling once he was satisfied with the final screenplay, which had undergone 25 modifications. He was unable to reject the studio's offer, though, which was to buy him out of his own ambition for $25,000, $100,000, $150,000, and more. They wanted the screenplay but not Stallone in the lead role. He didn't care because he was officially booked to play Rocky Balboa, but a studio eventually caved and added a lot of odd conditions in the contract that allowed them to fire him in the middle of filming if he acted out or broke any of the peculiar rules. Stallone asserted that he had long since perfected the art of subsisting on nothing and that he could continue to do so for a while longer if he continued to pursue the one thing that had the potential to transform his life. His own agents labeled him insane, stating, "That's a huge sum of money, especially for someone who could hardly afford to eat." The underdog tale, which so closely reflected Sylvester Stallone's own life, which saw him move from being an impoverished dreamer to a Hollywood star overnight, had people waiting for blocks throughout the city. More than just a box office success, Rocky became a phenomenon that captivated audiences across the United States and subsequently the rest of the world. Nobody could have foreseen the cultural explosion that Rocky would become, not even Stallone. There had never been a more intense Rocky obsession. "It was unbelievable how long I had that poor boy syndrome." Stallone was shocked to see the abundance of training gear, T-shirts, and posters of Rocky's victorious figure. When reporters asked him if he felt comfortable being associated with Rocky, he responded, "All of a sudden, the gates of fantasy opened. Are you serious? I wish I were." Rocky was his sincere response. This mental battle was particularly noticeable during the awards season, when Stallone battled the realization that, in spite of the thrill of achievement, he would never be able to live up to the unstoppable hero he had played on screen. Despite his knowledge that he was just a guy with weaknesses, a challenging past, and a convoluted family history, fans viewed him as Rocky Balboa. He said, "And the winner is Rocky." However, he thought of his mother being gone from his life. Naturally, she had turned down his invitation unless he had also invited her hairstylist Vivian. With 2 tickets, one for his mother and one for himself, Stallone was unable to make room for Vivian. His mother simply chose not to go rather than reaching a compromise. Even when he stepped onto the Academy Awards podium, Stallone's mother remained dubious despite his lifelong efforts to prove to her that he was worthy of their love, respect, and admiration. "Have they ever expressed their pride in you?" When asked, he gave the simple answer, "No, not at all." His mother, Jacqueline Stallone, had lived an odd life, more like a colorful older sister than a mother figure in appearance and manner. She claimed to have won beauty pageants, worked as an astrologer, and been a showgirl. Stallone's treatment of his own children was impacted by the fact that, despite his best efforts, he was never able to obtain the personal approval he had long craved from his mother. Such words went further than any criticism could. "There wouldn't be any Sylvester at all if I decided I didn't want to be a mother," she nonchalantly stated in interviews. "There wouldn't be Sylvester Stallone if it weren't for me." Because he was resolved not to repeat the past, Stallone worked to leave a legacy that his children could respect and continue. No matter how many stunts he did or how many months he spent filming on far-off sets, he wanted them to know that they were the center of his universe and that he was always there for them. He gave every new movie his all, often going to physical lengths that most people would find unimaginable. Stallone was obsessed with pushing boundaries, and he would perform his own stunts even if doing so put his safety in grave jeopardy. "Performing your own stunts has a certain romance," he stated. Drawing inspiration from the well-known boxing battle between Hagler and Hearns, Stallone aimed for realism. One notable occurrence occurred during the production of Rocky IV, but it's a different story when you're dealing with the aftermath of those stunts. He instructed his co-star Dolph Lundgren to actually punch him, adding that Lundgren, who was taller and a talented martial artist, administered the blow that left him in the hospital for 9 days. Doctors told him the injuries were similar to what he would have received in a head-on collision. Stallone's real-life injuries, which included numerous surgeries, episodes of pneumonia, broken necks, and fractured bones, had a detrimental long-term effect on his physical and mental health in addition to his rigorous filming schedule. Family members shared their constant worry that irreparable harm could be caused by one more surgery or mishap. Despite these real risks, Stallone seemed to be practically reliant on the pain, as if it were the only way to stay true to the gloomy characters he portrayed. While he and Arnold Schwarzenegger were having a great time promoting The Expendables 2 at Comic-Con, Stallone was unaware that tragedy was about to happen at home. He was heartbroken to hear shortly after that his 36-year-old son, Sage, had been found unconscious in his Los Angeles home. Others say it took days for anybody to find him. A moment of greatness may be followed by a return to the depths of misery, which never goes away and comes in waves. Stallone's world fell apart. If he had learned anything from life, it was to tolerate physical discomfort. But he had never been so distraught after losing his child. With tears in his eyes, he continued, "Loss and grief are the hardest things in the world to live with. No amount of rewriting can bring back a child, and no script can undo the inevitability of death." After Sage's funeral, Stallone, who had been a stranger in his own life, had always believed he could turn his story around and make it a triumph. He continued to experience heartbreak that rose and fell with the tide. He understood that family was the one thing that truly existed, breathing, alive, bleeding, and that now a part of it had been brutally torn away. "It feels like everything is slipping away from you when your kids grow up, your friends die, and your career ends. When Stallone once said, "Life is addition until the age of 40, after which it becomes subtraction." It dawned on me then that sometimes, even the most powerful individuals in your life may not be as unbeatable as you believe. Stallone recalled how everyone in the area began to cry on that terrible day, shortly after Sage's death, and how the prospect of losing another child left him completely shaken. In addition, he had to cope with another dreadful circumstance. His daughter required surgery to save her life. "Okay, kiss your baby goodbye," a nurse remarked nonchalantly as she brought his daughter away, and he remembered being horrified. "Stop," he pleaded. He felt that he was going to enter a dreadful dimension where he would lose another child, so he said, reword that, he felt a great deal of regret for not spending more time at home, for missing out on chances for personal growth, and for constantly being gone on film sets. He started to question whether any stunt or movie was worth the potential loss of so much precious family time. Sometimes understanding the present can be gained by reflecting on the past, in an effort to regain perspective and perhaps find, unaware of how profoundly his daughters would surprise him as they explored the streets he knew so well. Stallone put his palm on his shoulder and started by explaining to them the meaning of a sentence he had written in Rocky Balboa years before. He admitted that the sentence was exactly what he had always wanted to say to his kids in real life. "Where you used to fit right here, I'd hold you up and say to your mother, 'This kid's gonna be the best kid in the world.' The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows," the movie's well-known remark was revealed by his daughters. "But if you let it, this cruel place will beat you to your knees and hold you there. It matters more how hard you hit than how hard you can take a hit and continue. That's the secret to success." Stallone was shocked to learn that, in spite of the mayhem, the stunts, the surgeries, and the grief, his girls still saw him through the lens of that speech. He sobbed as he gave them a hug, believing that perhaps all the sacrifices were now being repaid. He had taught them a lot about resilience, but Stallone had never realized it. In reality, Stallone had lost everything several times, but he had lived to see his kids become wonderful adults and to see how Rocky had transcended both his family and himself to become a million-person cultural figure. "You know you're the luckiest person in the world," Stallone said, moved with gratitude as he stood in Philadelphia, the same city where he had once been that fearful, furious teenager looking for a mother's love. Rocky's tenacity, which is a mirror of Stallone's own unyielding determination to give up, has also inspired millions of fans worldwide. He famously said, "Rocky is now part of Americana. Every day, people imitate that victorious scene and throw their arms in the air as they dash up the Philadelphia Museum of Art stairs, transforming it into a kind of ritual that represents any small or transient personal victory." Others have praised Stallone for creating such a powerful depiction of perseverance and optimism, emphasizing that Rocky's accountability, humility, and sensitivity are equally as strong as his hardness. Others have stated, "I was obsessed with Rocky, as well as I kept watching it, seeing myself getting back up after every setback, just like Rocky did." The perfect metaphor, I asked myself, was the Philadelphia steps. Where can I clearly depict a man's journey from failure to success? Every day, visitors to Philadelphia raise their arms in the air, mimicking Rocky's triumphant stair climb. Even Stallone admits that he never thought that one movie, produced on a shoestring and in dire financial need, would spark such a potent cultural movement. "I've had my time, and I'm incredibly grateful for it," Stallone told his daughters, acknowledging that he feels extremely fortunate and grateful for everything he has accomplished over the decades that he has been in the spotlight, but he also acknowledged that fame is fleeting and that life changes are inevitable. As of reiterating the famous quote from Rocky, Stallone warns the next generation that life will always test them. "You're never asked, will you get knocked down?" He believes that true success comes from overcoming adversity rather than avoiding it, so instead, are you going to get back up? Every moment presents a chance to develop, gain knowledge, and succeed. Despite all of this, Stallone never denied his pain or his regrets. Instead, he used the fictional heroes he created on screen to become the real-life hero he aspired to be. Looking back, it is clear that Stallone faced nearly every type of adversity life could offer: an emotionally distant and abusive upbringing, repeated rejections by casting directors, contempt from film studios, injuries that left him in the hospital for days, and finally, the unfathomable anguish of losing a child. By the time he and his family returned to Philadelphia, Stallone had completely turned around. His legacy of inspirational movies now immortalizes the poor kid who once slept at bus stops, was left behind by his own mother, and was told he would never be anything more than a thug. He had discovered that, despite their allure, fame, and wealth could never completely erase a traumatic upbringing or protect a person from tragedy. But he also understood that love, real, imperfect, unadulterated, and complex love, could restore much of what had been lost. Stallone heard his children memorize the speech, and as they recited those lines about how cruel and terrible life is and how it will keep you down if you let it, he realized that everything he had ever wanted to teach his children about hope and resiliency had already been conveyed through Rocky Balboa's persona. He believed that life isn't about perfect travels or happily ever afters, but rather about how we handle hardship and what we do when faced with unthinkable obstacles. In the end, Sylvester Stallone's story is a reminder that while awards and box office records may be markers of success, what truly sets a person apart is their capacity to overcome setbacks. What they learn about love, family, and the fleeting nature of life is even more significant. According to Stallone, his greatest accomplishment was not holding an Oscar above his head in a glittering auditorium, but rather being on those Philadelphia steps with his children, knowing that they would carry on the legacy of hope and resiliency despite every tragedy, heartbreak, and friend lost.